Okay. Welcome back to Sunday's School. I wanted to start by answering two questions I got from the last time. And let me say this: I have so appreciated all of your questions, comments, the helps, remarks. It's been so helpful. So feel free to keep it coming. So I was asked last week, how do I know that Isaac knew about Esau's intentions? Well, that's a really easy answer. I don't. So I thought, well, here's how. And I started to open up and look, and I'm like, oh, you know what? He might not have known. He might have known that perhaps he was completely oblivious to the whole thing. We just don't know. And here's why that makes me so excited. Now, this is a trivia thing here. Who is the pillar and ground of the truth? Is it like the preacher? Nope, it's the church. So we should never tolerate something that is said as if it were from God that's not. Now, here's the thing. Everyone makes mistakes. I do, the pastor does, everybody does, so it's good to be that kind about it. But when you hear something that rubs you wrong, receive the word with joy, but search the scriptures and see if these things are so. And if they're not so, tell me. Because my goal is to only say, "Thus saith the Lord," when God hath said. And I'm going to need a little help with that because I'm not perfect. So feel free when something comes up, say, I wonder about that. So that's one. That two, I was asked, why am I not treating Jacob's experience at Bethel like salvation? How come that's not a salvation experience? And the really simple reason why not is there is no evidence in that text that would lead me to think that it was. Now, I said a few weeks back that salvation is a reality in the soul where you are joined to Jesus Christ. You receive a new life in Him and respond in repentance and faith. About 150 previously, we started to equate that reality with the emotional, spiritual experience that sometimes accompanies that reality. And there are two major problems with that. Sometimes you can have genuine salvation, you can be genuinely saved, and not have that deeply emotional experience at that time. And that was me. I was saved when I was 6, but it was not a deeply emotional experience. Now, since that time, I've had many spiritual, emotional experiences. And even though salvation was the single change in reality that changed my whole life, it was not accompanied by that experience. There was no walking an altar. There was no praying the sinner's prayer when somebody else did. All those things weren't there, but it was genuine salvation. The other really tricky thing is sometimes we make every spiritual, emotional experience to be salvation. So if you met God, or if you had a deep encounter with God, you must be saved. No, because again, salvation is a reality of the soul where you are joined to Jesus Christ. You get new life in Him, and you respond in repentance and faith. Not every experience is that. As we'll see later on, Laban actually talked to God. And the very next day said, "Hey, why did you take my gods?" It's like, so his experience of God is not salvation. Not every experience of God is salvation. So why don't I take that experience of his as salvation? There is no reason to. People can have spiritual experiences post-salvation, and unsaved people can have sincere, emotional, religious things. That doesn't mean they're saved. So that's that. Now, as we left last week, our hero was on his way to the Haran. Now that's about 120 or so miles, and he was traveling on foot. So this would take some time, and he would have to. So this would at least take, probably 6 or 7 days. It depends on his pace. So he finally gets to Haran, and he came to the land of the people of the east. Now, a little bit of background here. This town and these people were the people that now. Some of them were folks that have been there, and some that were folks that left with Abraham, left their home, went to the Haran, and then when God said, "Hey, why don't you keep going?" they stayed. So Abraham kept that going, went farther. They stayed in that place. And as we'll see, these are people, I'm just going to put it out right there now, they were what we now call semi-nomadic people. That means they weren't like the patriarchs where they always, went from place to place, but they weren't exactly, settled people in big towns and houses. They were kind of something in between, and we'll see that play out as the story goes on here. So he comes there, and the first thing he sees is cattle. Because for a semi-nomadic people, just like nomads, cattle is everything. And I told you, you're going to get sick of hearing about that cattle, but a cattle was their life. I mean, that cattle was everything. So he sees flocks of that cattle, and he sees them being brought to the well. They remove the stone, and they give the cow sheep. So he's seeing their like ways here. So Jacob comes right to them and asks them about Laban. So I remember he was sent specifically to the house of Laban to get a wife. And in those days, the well was kind of like the center of the town. So if you didn't know where something was, you'd go to the well. You would usually find somebody there because we all kind of like water. So you'll find somebody there, and it's a good place to go. So he asked them, Do you know him? Is he well? Where is he? And all those basic questions. And they say, he is well, and behold, Rachel, his daughter, cometh with the sheep. So this is really good timing. And, he says, so I'm looking for this family. He says, yeah, it just so happens right there is Rachel. Here she comes. Now, here's something that might make us scratch our heads because, this whole, I don't think anyone in this room is a rancher. So, so he says, lo, it's yet the high day, and it's not time for the cattle to be brought together. Go into the water at the sheep. So let me explain what's going on here. The towns in those days would typically have attendants who would be in charge of getting water for the people and like for the sheep and making sure that the people who aren't supposed to have the water don't, because the well was the center of town. The well was everything. So don't mess up our well. So he says, and he sees that their custom, which they'll say here, is, well, now we wait until all of the flocks are gathered, then we water them. Now that's not good practice, especially at high noon. It's hot. You have thirsty and animals. I mean, this is not good practice. And here's the difference between a semi-nomad and a nomad. They kept sheep, but if their sheep died, they had something to fall back on. Now, as we'll see that this whole time, Jacob knows his cattle. And he knows, because his livelihood depends on them. He doesn't, if my sheep die, at least I have that grain. This is it. My sheep are everything. So you take much better care of your sheep. And you said good practice. So we said, wait a minute, this is not good practice. We shouldn't be gathering all of these sheep here and then waiting and then bring it out. That's kind of lazy. So he himself picks up the stone that waters her sheep, which is an act of that service that we'll see how this gets taken advantage of. But this is not work of a guest. This is work of a servant. So he is intentionally being gracious. He's saying, I'm going to do kind of servile work, and I'm good, and I'm just going to help out. And this is the most romantic part here. He says, and it came to pass when Jacob saw that Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that he went and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock. And Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. So, okay, wait a minute. What? Why is he weeping here? Just think. Long odds here. He has been sent by his dad to go find one family, to go find a wife from that one family. He doesn't know if they're even alive still. There's no email, like they didn't, stay in touch by Facebook. He shows up in town, and she's right there. And and again, keep in mind, he is 77 years old and a bachelor, and suddenly she's right there. And he greets her, and he weeps for joy that God has done something great. So she runs and tells her brother, which is, this is big news. Our family's here, the family that we've not seen in forever. So she runs and tells her father, Laban, hears, he comes and gets Jacob, says I come home, says, surely thou art bone of my, surely thou art my bone and of flesh. And he abode with him for a month. So this is love at first sight. Things are working out so well. On his first day, after 77 years of blah, and after this long walk by himself with just his staff, he gets there. On day one, he sees a person, and he falls in love at first sight. He sees that she's got sheep, which again is a big deal. She is wealthy. He meets the parents, and dad's like, awesome, I'm so glad that I'm here. Why don't you stay for a month? So things are going pretty well. And we would love to say, and that's at the end. They lived happily ever after at the end. Well, day one was great, and it went downhill from there. Now, there's something here that might not be obvious until we understand the culture, but Laban says, because thou art my brother, shouldest thou serve me for naught? Tell me what thy wages shall be. We think, okay, well, that's fair. He's saying, hey, if you're going to work that for me, I should be paying you. That's awesome, right? No. Here's why. Back in those days, and still in these days, in some places, hospitality is everything. So staying for a month is not staying too long. I remember when I went to the Republic of Georgia, I was kind of negotiating my rent with the family I would be staying with. They were insisting on nothing. Like, no, you stay here for free, and we'll give you food and lodging and everything, and free. I'm like, yeah, but I might be here for a year. I can't stay here for a year for free. They're like, yeah, you can. You just, do. I'm like, no. I have to pay you some. And we went back and forth because no. You stay for as long as you want for free because you are our guest. That was especially true for that family. So that family was everything, like how we talked about. Hospitality was everything. We see from how Jacob started, we don't know that what happened in that month, but we know that Jacob is good with cattle. He knows his stuff. He's been at this for 77 years. He's that good at it. And how we see here, Laban saying, hey, You shouldn't serve me that for nothing. What was Jacob doing serving him in like the first place? Now, we don't know exactly how this dynamic developed, but from what we know of Laban's character, he is not one to turn down cheap help. And he's got this guy here for a month who's trying to impress that people who is really good. He says, I need to keep him around. So he sort of implies service. He says, should you serve me for nothing? So if I walked up to the Richie and say to Richie, it is really nice of you to volunteer how to clean my house, but you really should let me pay you. His first response would probably be like, whoa, back the train up. I didn't agree to nothing, Where do you go in this, I'm going to clean your house for? So it's a breach of the customs and saying, if you're going to be serving me, I should be paying you. Now, we all know what happened. Laban had two daughters, Rachel and Leah. Now it says here in the King James that Leah was tender-eyed. Now, if you read a bunch of different English translations, they're going to say a bunch of different things because, frankly, the complete fact is we're not exactly sure what that word means. Sometimes you get words in a context, so we're not exactly sure what tender-eyed meant. But from the contrast, she was this, but Rachel was the beautiful and well-favored. So whatever the tender-eyed meant, it's a contrast to the beautiful and well-favored. So it's not a compliment. So he's got two daughters. One is not complimentary, and one is beautiful and well-favored. And we already know that Jacob loved Rachel and said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel, thy younger daughter. Okay, this is extravagant. Now, keep in mind, what did Jacob bring with him from Canaan? His staff, nothing else. So he's very aware, I have the dowry. I have nothing to offer. I don't know how I'm gonna get a wife. The only thing he has to offer are his skills and his services. So it's not unreasonable for him to say, I will trade my services for a wife. That's a reasonable thing. Now you might be saying, yeah, but 7 years is a bit excessive. And you would be right. 7 years for a wife is what I would pay for a chieftain's daughter, a princess, like someone like this is so again, I mean, he is going out of his way to say, she is so valuable to me. I will work for her for 7 years. And her dad says, deal. Now, was he wrong for saying deal? No. I mean, Jacob offered. He offered a very unbalanced deal, and Laban said, sure, deal. But from a family member, hearing that saying, was that about the kindest thing? No, he could have said, you know what, that is really, I am so impressed that you would make such an offer, but maybe 3 years. Let's, I feel better about asking that much of you. Does this sound in any way familiar? Does this sound in any way like Jacob and Esau? when Jacob had a chance to make an unfair bargain, and he took it. And we already discussed that, especially with like that family. That's really not a kind-hearted, noble thing to do. Well, he's getting a taste of his own medicine here. He says, I love your daughter so much, I'll work 7 years for her. And instead of saying, oh, that's so sweet, her dad says, done. So he works 7 years for her, and they seemed to him but a few days for the love he had for her. Aww, this is awesome. So even after he's basically being just swindled by a dad, he's like, you know what? It's fine because I get Rachel. It's so worth it. So 7 years goes by, and just keep that in mind, 7 years, okay? He was 77. He works for 7 years keeping sheep. And he says, hey, it's time for me to get my wife here. So Laban gathers together all the men of the place and makes a feast. Now keep in mind here, the whole idea of a church wedding, where you have a person says special words and makes them married, is a new thing. I mean, we've only been doing that for about 800 years. So that before that, in most cultures and most places, it was just kind of a family thing. So you would have a party, you would invite people, have this grand feast, and at the end, to the thing that really made you a man and wife was consummating the marriage. So you would have a feast, so that you would take out your wife, and you would be married. So it says, and it came to pass in the evening that they took Leah, his daughter, and that brought her to him, and he went in unto her. Now, there has been speculation all over the place. How did he not know it was the wrong bride? Some said he might have been drunk. He might have had a veil. Who knows? But he didn't know. And I'm going to give you a little bit of relationship and advice that from my vast experience here. If you are not 100% sure of the identity of the person you are going to marry, don't get married. Okay? If you're just 99% sure, don't say I do. For some reason, I have no idea why. It blows out my mind. Frankly, I'm baffled. And the only possible answers are not very complimentary, but he didn't know. And he took a wife, and it was not the one that he wanted. So obviously, he's mad. And again, this blows my mind, but and it came to pass that in the morning, behold, it was Leah. So again, don't put yourself in the position where could possibly be whoops. Like, this is not a whoops thing, but hey, it was. So he says, to Laban, I mean, he's mad. He says, I served you for Rachel, and you gave me Leah. And says, it must not be so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Fulfill her week, and we will give thee this also for the service which thou shalt serve me, yet 7 other years. Says, well, Jacob, see, there was a misunderstanding. See, in our culture, you always marry the oldest I went first, so I had to. But I'll tell you what, you work just another 7 years, again, which is an extraordinary price to pay for a bride. So he pays it twice. And says, just 7 more years, and you can get Rachel that too. And he does it. Now, I just want to say, from the timeline, it seems very likely, almost a certainty that he did not have to wait 7 more years for Rachel. He was given both of them as wife, and he had to work these 7 years to pay it back. And we know that just because from what we're going to go through next, the whole saga of their family life could not have been done in just 7 years, because it takes 9 months to be pregnant. So just you can't have all those kids. It just wouldn't have worked. So it is very likely that he got both women, and he just owed 7 more years of service. So now he is a hired servant to Laban, that basically working for that free. But he finally has the family he wanted. So we're going to look at the family life of Jacob, and I'm going to warn you right off the bat, it's not pretty. Now, I want to address one thing, because it's kind of the elephant in the room. In those days, God didn't specifically prohibit multiple wives. However, from the beginning, it was not so. From the beginning, it was one woman and one man. That was always God's ideal. That because Jesus said so. So just because God didn't specifically say don't do it, doesn't mean it was a good idea. So I think all of us can agree that even though multiple wives was permitted, it was not ideal, and we'll see that going forward here. But if you did have multiple wives, this sounds weird, but there's definitely a wrong way to how to handle it, and that's it. I mean, this whole thing was just not proper. So right from at the start, he loved Rachel more than Leah, and served up with him 7 other years. So he loved one wife more than the other. Is this reminding you a bit of Isaac? How did he feel when his dad loved his brother more than him? Not great, right? So he learned a valuable lesson and said, in that family life, I'm not going to be like that. Nope, he was just like that. And he loved one wife more than the other, which is just fantastic right from at the start. And when the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Let's just stop for a minute and grasp what's being said here. God saw their family life and said, this just is not okay. I'm going to give a special blessing to Leah. I mean, God, the God, saw this and said, wow, I can't believe how he's treating her. This is not okay, folks. So she conceived and bore a son named Reuben. Now, I want to point out what these names mean. This name says, see a son. So, frankly, if the one way that she could get her husband's love was by bearing her children, there's a serious problem. Because she said, "Surely, the Lord hath looked upon my affliction. Now, therefore, my husband will love me." How sad is that? How sad that she has to earn her husband's love by having a kid, and spoiler alert, she most certainly did not earn his love. So, so things still continue on. She's still hated. God gives her that one more son, Simeon. That means a hearing. Because God heard her pleas. Because someone's hearing her. Her husband's not, but at least that to me. Wow. And she conceived again, and bare a son that says, "Now I will praise the Lord." And named him Judah. That means praise. And Rachel saw that she bare Jacob no children. Now, it is fair for her to be sad about this. Okay? That's a fair thing. But she envied her sister. Is it her sister's fault? No. But she envied her sister and said to Jacob, "Give me children or else I die." And Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel and said, "Am I in God's stead?" Okay, what a husband here, right? His wife. So again, we're seeing everyone here is just being terrible. His wife is responding very poorly to this fact, but she comes to Jacob in deep emotional distress, and he gets that mad at her. So again, the husband of the year right here. So she comes up with a plan and says, "Take my maid Bilhah and bear children in my name through her." Now, again, this was culturally permissible, but never God's plan. And we've seen this work so well in their family history, right? Wrong. And again, I mean, I'm not the relationship expert here, but if you have two wives and now you're having some real problems making that things work, adding another one is probably not the best idea. I mean, but he does. So he takes Bilhah and has a son named Dan. Which means judging, that God has judged her, and God has seen her worthy, and God saw her plan and said yes. Now, just because something that happens doesn't mean God's behind this. So just because it worked doesn't mean that God was saying, "Hey, thumbs up, great plan. She did this." And she had a son, and God has judged it and said it was good. No, God didn't. And Bilhah conceived once more, and I love this. And Rachel said, with great wrestlings, I wrestled with my sister and that prevailed. Having children is not a sport. But I guess it was in that family. And she's like, "Hey, I'm catching up." So she named her child. Again, she's naming her children this. My wrestling. So Leah says, "Hey, this is working out so good for her. I'm going to do the same. I'm going to give Zilpah, my maid, to Jacob." And once more he says, "Sure, great plan. So add one more wife." Because that 4 must be like must not be like that, the magic number that for wives. So he has a child named Gad, a troop. She is openly bragging about the fact, I have a troop of sons. So again, great family dynamic. Imagine being the kids raised in this, right? So then she has another ad named whose name that means happy, which is at least positive sounding. But again, think of the whole dynamic here. She's happy because she's winning in the child contest. Yeah, all this is happening. So again, it gets even worse. That because of course it does. So Reuben's out. Finds mandrakes, which is a very rare. The herb, and Rachel says to Leah, "Hey, give me of your son's mandrakes." And Leah says, "You stole my husband from me, and now you want my son's mandrakes?" So Rachel makes a deal. She barters. This happened, folks. She barters the intimacy with her husband for mandrakes. And Jacob, being a lot like Isaac here, says, "All right." And she has a kid, and names him, that, which means a hire. Because she basically hired out her husband. I mean, again, she names her children this. And Leah conceives once more and names her kids Zebulun, which means a dwelling, because now my husband will dwell with me. It didn't happen the first 5 times, but she thinks this one it will. She has a daughter named Dinah, which is kind of the female version of Dan. So it's kind of like, oh yeah, God judged you. Well, God just judged me too. Wow. So that's a God remembers Rachel, and she bears a son named Joseph, which means, and she says, God will add me one more too. Okay, that's where we're going to stop for that. The text here, and we'll move on next week. But I just want to take a few minutes here to just put all this together. Model family, right? I mean, this is terrible. And there are going to be consequences for his terrible choices. Two of his sons are going to commit heinous sexual sins that are just perverse. Does anything in their family life, lead you to think that they might have learned that at home? Right? 2 of his sons are going to commit mass murder and kill all the male inhabitants of a village. See anything in how they were raised that might make them think that I have to win at all costs and ends justify the means? Yeah, a couple, right? A few things might have led them to think that. There were consequences for their terrible family life. But that's not the main point here. When you get to the heavens someday, you are going to see new Yep, thank you. They're coming down from from heaven as a bride. It's going to be beautiful. This is going to be your eternal home forever. And there's going to be 12 gates to that new, yeah, that's the same word I can't say. And those 12 gates are going to be named after the 12 tribes of Israel. Those 12 rotten names that point to just everything that's wrong about their family life. God used that rotten that family to do something amazing. So much so that for all eternity, we are going to have gates commemorating that family that God used, despite all their mistakes, despite all their rottenness. I just want to point out some good parts about this family. This is the first time that we actually have a real family. I mean, Abraham had 8 sons who went in 8 different directions. Not a whole lot of that family, that feeling going in there. Isaac had 2 sons who went in 2 different directions. Not a whole lot of that family going on here. For all their flaws, and there are flaws. I mean, trying to murder each other, selling it to slavery. Yeah, that's flaws. But they were a family. They had a real family bond that none of the others really had, and that's why they became a people. Instead of going in 12 different directions, they stayed a people, and they loved their father. You see at the very end how much devotion they had to their father. There was real family love, and God used that family to make a people, a very special people, and from that people, all the nations of the earth were blessed, and that people is still alive. That family bond that they have still exists 4,000 years later. And God has used that family more than any other family. God has done amazing things through that messed up family. I just want to say this. The choices you make in your families have real life consequences. But you have a God of grace who does amazing things through broken things. And that messed up that family, I don't know what. I know this for a fact. Every one of you have made some mistakes in your family. As a father, son, wife, daughter, whatever, you've blown it somehow. Probably not as bad as Jacob. I think, but you've made mistakes. And those mistakes have had consequences, just like mine. But God does great things through broken things. And God can do amazing things through your family, because He's a God of grace. So as we see how things go next week, consider this family and what God, by His grace, does for those that He favors. And if you are saved, that means you. So let's pray and be dismissed. God, I do thank you for your favor, Lord. And I ask that you will bless with all the blessings in Christ. And I pray this in Christ's name. Amen. Thank you. You are dismissed.
you.